Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're diving into China's military strategy and the illicit fentanyl trade.
Uh-huh.
You've given us some pretty dense reports, so we've gone through them and
Yeah.
pulled out the most interesting parts for you.
It's fascinating how
Yeah.
these two seemingly separate issues
Right.
are actually intertwined.
Okay.
We'll be exploring China's strategic thinking
Mhm.
on a global scale,
Right.
and then we'll zoom in on this specific illegal trade that impacts both of our countries.
Right. So to kick things off,
Yeah.
we'll examine what China says about its own military strategy
Okay.
by pulling directly from a 2013 document from their Academy of Military Science.
Got it.
And then we'll shift gears to a more recent report on
Okay.
the evolution of the illicit fentanyl trade.
The key here is understanding not just what's happening, but
Yeah.
why.
Okay.
What are the motivations and goals driving China's actions
Yeah.
in both of these arenas?
What's the bigger picture?
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack China's evolving military strategy.
Okay.
Before we can analyze their statements,
Yeah.
we need to understand how they defined strategy in the first place.
Absolutely. And this document, straight from the Academy of Military Science,
Yeah.
really emphasizes the shift from mechanized warfare
Oh,
to what they call informationized warfare.
informationized warfare.
Yes.
That sounds intense.
It is.
So are they talking about cyber warfare, space warfare, things that sound like they're straight out of a sci-fi movie?
Precisely.
Okay.
They are explicitly talking about expanding their operational space from 3 dimensions to 5,
Okay.
adding space and cyberspace as battlefields.
Okay.
Think about it. This isn't just about controlling land, sea, and air anymore.
Wow.
It's about controlling the flow of information and dominating the digital realm.
Wow. That raises a big question for me. How does this new approach to warfare impact their overall global strategy? I mean, what are they hoping to achieve with this?
That's a great question.
Yes.
And it's something we'll be unpacking further as we go along.
Okay.
It's interesting because the report delves into their view
Yeah.
of strategic culture,
Yeah.
emphasizing peace, unity, and defense.
Okay. So peace-loving nation, right?
Right.
Okay.
But then there's this
Yeah.
interesting twist.
Okay.
They also talk about active defense, which includes, and I quote, strategic attacks when necessary.
Okay.
They even go into detail about how they plan to deter, absorb, and control the Western Pacific and Northern Indian Ocean.
So they're saying they want peace, but they're also clearly preparing
Right.
for potential conflict.
Yes.
Especially in those key strategic areas.
Exactly.
Okay.
And to understand their approach, we need to look at what they call
Okay.
the 3 provides and 1 role,
Okay.
which they define as their historical mission. Okay, break that down for me. What does 3 provides and 1 role
Sure.
actually mean in practice?
The 3 provides refer to
Okay.
providing strong military backing for the country's reunification.
Think Taiwan.
Think Taiwan, yes.
Okay.
Safeguarding national development and actively participating in world peace.
Okay.
And the 1 role refers to effectively playing the role of the military in responding to various crises,
Okay.
even those that fall outside of traditional warfare.
So they're basically saying they want to be a dominant force on the world stage,
Yes.
both militarily and economically.
Yes.
But this report also highlights some potential challenges to their peaceful development, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
They specifically point to what they call strategic containment
Okay.
by the U.S. and other Western countries.
So how do they see this containment playing out?
They see it as multifaceted, ranging from political and economic pressure to military posturing
Okay.
in the Asia-Pacific region.
Okay.
You might be wondering how this connects back to what we were discussing earlier
Yeah.
about informationized warfare.
I am, actually. It seems like controlling information and narratives would be a huge part
Yes.
of any kind of geopolitical struggle.
You got it.
Yeah.
They even single out the U.S. air-sea battle concept as a direct challenge to their ambitions.
Interesting. It's like they're acknowledging that the U.S. is a major competitor,
Yeah.
but they're also confident in their ability to overcome these challenges.
Right. And to do that, they have to understand their own strengths and weaknesses.
Okay.
It's fascinating to see how they analyze this in the document.
Yeah.
For example, they acknowledge their limitations in terms of air and naval power
Right.
for distant combat,
Okay.
which is where that U.S. air-sea battle concept comes in.
Right. But on the flip side, They emphasize their geographic advantages
Exactly.
and rapidly developing infrastructure. Right.
Exactly. They're well aware that their location gives them a strategic edge in certain areas, and they're investing heavily in building up their capabilities.
Okay.
And there's one more piece of their military strategy that I think you'll find really interesting.
Okay, let's hear it.
Their nuclear deterrent strategy.
Ooh, okay.
Their approach is focused on what's called a second strike capability.
Okay.
They talk about the importance of survivability and penetration ability for their nuclear forces.
Okay.
Essentially, they want to make sure that even if another country were to launch a nuclear attack against them,
Right.
they would still be able to retaliate.
So it's a strategy of deterrence, basically saying, don't even think about attacking us.
Exactly.
Because we can hit back.
It's a calculated approach aimed at preventing nuclear conflict rather than initiating it.
Got it.
But what's really fascinating is they also delve into what they call non-war military activities, like international cooperation and counterterrorism efforts.
So they're not just focused on traditional warfare.
Right.
It seems like they're thinking about a much broader
Yes.
range of military activities.
Right. This showcases how their military strategy goes beyond the battlefield to include a wider range of activities on the world stage.
Okay.
And it's through this lens that we can begin to understand how the illicit fentanyl trade fits into the picture.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about that.
Okay.
How does the fentanyl trade tie into China's overall strategy?
Well, first, it's important to note that China made fentanyl a controlled substance
Right.
back in 2019.
Right. And the report we have talks about how that decision really changed the game for illegal vendors.
It did.
They've had to adapt their tactic.
Exactly. The report specifically mentions the use of precursors, chemicals used to make fentanyl, that are harder to track because they have legitimate uses as well. It makes you wonder how much control they truly have over these substances.
So it's like a constant shell game.
Yes.
Where they're finding new ways to stay ahead of the authorities.
Exactly.
And the report also delves into the role of money laundering in all of this.
Absolutely. And it highlights some of the sophisticated methods being used, like something called mirror transactions, which involve moving money through seemingly legitimate businesses to obscure its origins.
Okay, walk me through how that works. It sounds pretty complex.
Imagine you have two seemingly unrelated businesses in different countries. They appear to be conducting normal transactions with each other, but in reality, they're coordinating those transactions to move money for the drug cartels.
Got it.
Making it look like legitimate business activity.
Right.
It's a way to clean the dirty money and make it virtually untraceable.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a clever, albeit illegal, tactic. The report even lays out a step-by-step process of how drug cartels use Chinese money brokers to launder their profits. It's pretty eye-opening.
This level of detail is crucial for understanding the complexity of the problem and the challenges in combating it. It's not just a few small-time operations.
Right.
We're talking about a sophisticated global network.
Right. And it makes you wonder about the level of cooperation from the Chinese government.
Yeah.
I mean, the report does point out that China has been cooperating with the U.S. To some extent.
Yes.
They've scheduled certain fentanyl precursors at the UN's request.
True.
But also highlights areas where more progress is needed.
Yes.
Like scheduling a key precursor called 4AP.
Right.
Which, remember, has absolutely no legitimate uses.
Yes.
This makes it especially dangerous because there's no reason for it to be produced or traded except for illicit purposes.
Exactly.
So there's this ongoing back and forth between China and the U.S. on this issue with some cooperation, but also lingering concerns about the effectiveness of China's enforcement efforts.
Exactly. And that tension is something we'll be exploring further as we continue our deep dive.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a complex situation, to be sure.
Yeah.
There are so many factors at play.
Right.
And it's crucial to consider the different perspectives involved.
You know, it strikes me as a bit of a paradox.
Okay.
We were just talking about how China's military document emphasizes informationized warfare, which seems very high-tech and futuristic.
Right.
But the fentanyl trade is very much grounded in the physical world.
Yeah.
We're talking about smuggling chemicals and cash across borders, which feels very old school.
That's a sharp observation.
Yes.
It highlights the multifaceted nature of China's strategy.
Right.
They're operating on multiple levels, utilizing both traditional and cutting-edge methods to achieve their goals,
It's almost as if they're playing both sides of the chessboard simultaneously,
Yeah.
engaging in high-tech cyber warfare while also profiting from this very low-tech drug trade. It's a bit mind-boggling.
It certainly makes understanding their motivations all the more challenging.
Right.
Are they being opportunistic, simply taking advantage of whatever opportunities arise?
Yeah.
Or is there a more calculated strategic calculus at play?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, the report on the fentanyl trade does suggest that Chinese authorities are making some efforts to crack down on illegal production and trafficking.
Yes, but the report also points out that there are still significant gaps in enforcement, particularly when it comes to those precursor chemicals and the intricate world of money laundering.
So it's like a never-ending game of whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
You shut down one operation and another one pops up somewhere else, often using even more sophisticated tactics to evade detection. It makes you wonder about their true commitment to tackling this issue.
It does raise an important question.
Yeah.
Is China truly committed to stopping the flow of fentanyl? Or are they merely trying to appease the U.S. and other countries while allowing the trade to continue, perhaps even benefiting from it in some way?
Yeah. Well, their military document does emphasize the importance of safeguarding national development, which could include economic interests tied to the fentanyl trade.
It's possible.
It's a disturbing thought,
yes,
but it's certainly a possibility.
It's a possibility worth considering.
Yeah.
And it underscores the difficulty in disentangling China's economic and security interests. Especially when they appear to be intertwined.
Yeah.
Remember that report we were talking about earlier? With the detailed step-by-step process of how drug cartels use Chinese money brokers to launder their profits?
Yes, it was quite a deep dive into the financial underworld.
Exactly. And it mentioned those mirror transactions that we talked about. Where vast sums of money are being moved through seemingly legitimate businesses.
Yeah.
That level of financial sophistication suggests that the fentanyl trade isn't just a few rogue actors operating in the shadows. We're talking about a highly organized and lucrative criminal enterprise with potential connections to powerful networks within China.
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
And it makes tackling the problem even more daunting.
Yes.
If these networks are deeply embedded within the Chinese financial system.
Right.
It raises serious doubts about the effectiveness of any crackdown, even if the authorities are genuinely committed to it.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Yeah.
Addressing the fentanyl crisis requires a multifaceted approach. It's not just about law enforcement and border security. It's about targeting the financial networks that fuel the trade and allow it to flourish.
And it's about international cooperation too, right?
Absolutely.
The report talked about the need for sharing intelligence and coordinating enforcement efforts across borders to disrupt these transnational criminal networks.
Absolutely. And it mentioned the role of the UN in pressuring China to schedule certain fentanyl precursors. However, there are still key chemicals, like 4-AP, which, remember, has no legitimate uses that remain unscheduled.
It's a reminder that while China has shown some willingness to cooperate, there's still a long way to go.
And there's that underlying tension between China and the U.S., which we touched on earlier. There's a recognition that cooperation is necessary. But there's also a lot of mistrust and suspicion on both sides.
That mistrust is rooted in a broader geopolitical rivalry, with both countries vying for power and influence on the global stage. And it spills over into areas like the fentanyl trade. Making it difficult to separate the criminal issue from the geopolitical one.
Precisely. It's a reminder that the fentanyl crisis isn't just a public health issue. It's a geopolitical one with implications for the relationship between China and the U.S. And the broader balance of power in the world.
It seems like everything is connected.
It is.
The fentanyl trade, the U.S.-China rivalry, the shifting global landscape. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, and it's precisely why these deep dives are so crucial. They help us unpack these complex issues and connect the dots. And I think it's fair to say that the fentanyl crisis exposes some contradictions in China's strategy. Their military document emphasizes active defense and safeguarding national development. Yet their involvement in the fentanyl trade seems to undermine both of those goals.
It's puzzling, for sure.
It is.
Does it reflect a disconnect between their words and their actions? Or could it point to a more cynical view of their true intentions? It's difficult to say.
Their document talks about their desire to participate in world peace,
Right.
but their actions in the South China Sea.
Right.
And their assertive military posture suggests a different agenda.
It's almost like they're trying to have it both ways, promoting themselves as a peaceful nation while simultaneously flexing their military muscle.
Yeah.
And engaging in activities that destabilize the global order.
It's possible that they see their actions, even the aggressive ones, as defensive.
Okay.
They might argue that they're simply protecting what they perceive as their rightful territory and interests.
But their expansionist claims and military buildup in the South China Sea have raised concerns among their neighbors and fueled tensions with the U.S.
Right.
It's hard to view those actions as purely defensive.
You're right.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the fundamental challenge of interpreting China's actions.
Right.
What they view as defensive, others may see as aggressive.
Right.
And this perceptual gap can lead to misunderstandings and escalate tensions, which doesn't bode well for global stability.
So where does the fentanyl trade fit into all of this?
Right.
Is their involvement simply a matter of economic opportunism? Or is it part of a larger strategy to undermine the U.S. and other Western countries?
Yeah.
It's a troubling thought.
It is.
But one that we can't ignore.
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Their military document talks about their commitment to active defense.
Right.
But their involvement in the fentanyl trade seems more like a form of offense.
Yeah.
Even if it's unconventional.
It's like they're waging a shadow war.
Right.
Using the fentanyl trade to inflict harm on their rivals without engaging in direct military conflict.
Yes.
And that makes it even more difficult to counter.
It does.
It's not an overt act of aggression.
Right.
So it's harder to mobilize a response and hold them accountable.
And it makes their long-term goals even more enigmatic.
Right.
Are they simply trying to weaken their rivals?
Yeah.
Or is there a more ambitious agenda at play?
Right.
Remember, their military document talks about their historical mission to achieve national reunification, which includes Taiwan.
And some analysts believe that China may be willing to use the fentanyl crisis as leverage in their dealings with the U.S.
Yes.
Perhaps trying to extract concessions on issues like Taiwan or trade.
It's possible.
It's a sobering thought, to be sure.
It's a stark reminder that the fentanyl trade isn't just a criminal issue.
Right.
It's a geopolitical one.
Yeah.
With the potential to influence international relations and even the course of history.
So, given all of this,
What can be done to address this incredibly complex and multifaceted challenge?
Right.
The report on the fentanyl trade stressed the need for both domestic and international efforts.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Domestically, it's vital to strengthen law enforcement and border security to disrupt the flow of fentanyl into the country.
Okay.
But it's equally important to address the demand side of the equation.
Right.
By tackling the root causes of addiction
Okay.
and providing treatment and support for those who are struggling.
It's a two-pronged approach.
Yes.
Targeting both the supply and the demand.
Right.
But what about the international front?
Internationally, it's essential to increase cooperation with China and other countries
Right.
to dismantle the production and trafficking networks.
Okay.
But as we've discussed, that cooperation needs to be built on a foundation of mutual trust
Right.
and a shared commitment to addressing the problem,
Right.
which can be difficult to achieve,
Right.
given the existing geopolitical tensions.
It's a delicate balancing act, for sure.
The report also emphasized the importance of using financial intelligence
Yeah.
to target the money laundering networks that are the lifeblood of the fentanyl trade.
Right.
This requires sharing information and coordinating efforts across borders.
It's a reminder that tackling the fentanyl crisis requires a whole-of-government approach,
Yes.
involving not just law enforcement,
Right.
but also intelligence agencies,
Yeah.
financial regulators,
Yeah.
and diplomatic efforts.
Yeah.
It's a massive undertaking.
It is.
Yeah.
And it requires sustained commitment and resources,
Right.
as this is not a problem that will be solved overnight.
So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into China's military strategy and the evolving fentanyl trade,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of understanding China's motivations and goals,
Right.
which, as we've seen, can be complex and often contradictory.
Their actions often reflect a mix of pragmatism, opportunism, and a deep-seated belief in their own historical destiny. It's a potent combination.
They're a rising power with global ambitions,
Right.
and they're not afraid to assert themselves on the world stage.
Right. But they're also facing internal challenges and external pressures.
Yes.
which can make their actions unpredictable at times.
It's true.
Understanding their strategic thinking is crucial.
Yes.
For navigating this increasingly complex global landscape and responding effectively to the challenges they present, including the fentanyl crisis.
And as we've discussed, it requires looking beyond simple narratives and recognizing the multifaceted nature of their strategy.
They're playing a long game.
Yes.
And we need to be prepared to engage with them on multiple levels, using a combination of diplomacy, deterrence, and cooperation.
Right.
It's a challenging but necessary task.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to remember that the fentanyl crisis is not just a public health issue.
Right.
It's a geopolitical one.
Yeah.
With the potential to shape the relationship between China and the U.S. And the balance of power in the world.
It's a stark reminder that we live in an interconnected world.
We do.
And the actions of one country can have far-reaching consequences for others.
They can.
And that brings us to a critical question that we'll explore further in the final part of our deep dive. It's almost as if China is walking a tightrope, trying to balance their domestic interests with their international image. They want to be seen as a responsible global leader, but they're not afraid to put their own needs first, even if it means clashing with other countries.
Exactly. And the fentanyl trade puts them in a particularly delicate position. I mean, the evidence presented in the report makes it difficult to deny their role in the crisis. But they're also very sensitive to any accusations that they're intentionally harming other nations.
It's interesting how this all circles back to that concept of active defense that we discussed earlier. They might try to argue that they're simply defending their economic interests, even if those interests involve the production and export of fentanyl.
That's a valid point, but how do they reconcile that with their stated commitment to participating in world peace?
Exactly.
It seems incredibly contradictory and frankly dangerous. They're playing a high-stakes game that could easily backfire if the fentanyl crisis continues to escalate.
And the U.S. is undoubtedly watching this unfold very closely. The report mentioned that the DEA has been working with Chinese authorities to try to crack down on the fentanyl trade. But you have to wonder if it's enough.
There's a palpable sense of frustration on the U.S. side. They see China as the root of the problem and are pushing for more aggressive action. It's created this diplomatic tug of war with both sides accusing the other of not doing enough.
It highlights how the fentanyl crisis is not just a criminal or public health issue, but a geopolitical flashpoint.
Exactly.
With the potential to further strain relations between China and the U.S. It adds another layer of complexity.
It does.
To an already complicated relationship.
And it underscores the need for a more nuanced and sophisticated approach when dealing with China. One that recognizes their complexities and avoids simplistic narratives.
It's crucial to remember that China is not a monolithic entity. There are different factions and interests at play, and their actions often reflect a balancing act between these competing forces. It's not always easy to decipher their motivations or predict their next move.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listener? What should they be thinking about as they process all this information?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Understanding China requires looking beyond the headlines. And delving deeper into their strategic thinking, which is shaped by their history, culture, and ambitions.
They're a rising power with a long-term vision, and they're playing the game on their own terms. It's crucial to engage with them in a way that recognizes their strengths, understands their motivations, and anticipates their moves.
It's a challenging but essential task for anyone who wants to navigate the complexities of the 21st century.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that the world is becoming increasingly interconnected. The actions of one country can have profound consequences for others.
So we'll leave you with this final thought. As China continues to rise and assert itself on the global stage, how will their actions shape the future of international relations? And what role will they play in addressing global challenges, like the fentanyl crisis?
It's certainly food for thought. And that's what the deep dive is all about.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.